A poker pro mocked Maid's daughter for $1 million. One hand ended it. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In the heart of a luxurious casino, a place where only the richest and most powerful players dared to enter, an unexpected encounter was about to change everything. The high-stakes poker table was alive with tension. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and freshly polished oak. The polished chips clinked, and the sound of shuffled cards echoed throughout the private VIP room. This was no ordinary game. At the table sat seasoned professionals, men who had spent decades mastering the art of poker. And then there was her, a young woman who had never played a game like this in her life. She wasn't supposed to be there, certainly not among the world's best. She was the daughter of a maid, a girl who had grown up cleaning the floors of the casino's Grand Hotel, watching the high rollers come and go. Her name was Emily, and she was out of place in every sense of the word. But fate has a funny way of intervening. The poker pro, a man by the name of Richard Calloway, was one of the most notorious players in the game. He had won millions and lost millions. But today, something about Emily intrigued him. He leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes scanning the room, and then he smiled, a cruel, condescending smile. He had heard the whispers about her, the maid's daughter, the one who had somehow ended up at the casino's finest private table. Richard decided to have a little fun at her expense. "All right, kid," he sneered. "Let's make this interesting. Her life, or it could ruin her forever." Richard's laughter filled the room. "What? You're not going to back out now, are you? I guess you don't have what it takes to play with the big boys." His voice dripped with mockery. The other players at the table chuckled, some shaking their heads as they watched the young woman with amusement. Emily looked at the chips on the table, then at Richard's smug face. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but there was no way she was going to back down. "I'll play," she said quietly, her voice steady, but her hands were trembling. The game began, and as the cards were dealt, Richard's smirk grew wider. He had been playing poker for more than 20 years, and he knew how to read his opponents like an open book. He thought he could easily predict the moves of this inexperienced girl. But as the game went on, something strange happened. Emily wasn't folding. She wasn't intimidated. And as Richard placed his bets, something inside her clicked. She wasn't just playing poker. She was playing for something much bigger. A deep, quiet determination filled her. Richard was about to find out that sometimes, underestimating the quietest players leads to the biggest surprises. As the cards were dealt, the room seemed to grow even quieter. Richard Calloway's smirk never left his face, but Emily could sense the tension in the air. Her hands, still shaking slightly, gripped the edges of the table as she carefully examined her hand. She had no idea what she was doing, really, but something in her gut told her that she could win this. Richard, on the other hand, was already mentally counting his winnings. He had won countless games like this before, and this one was no different. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he watched Emily with a look of amusement. "You do know the odds are against you, right?" he said with a condescending tone. "But, if you want to embarrass yourself, be my guest." The other players at the table shifted uncomfortably. Richard was known for his sharp tongue, but today, it seemed even sharper, especially when directed at the young woman sitting across from him. Emily didn't flinch. She just stared at her hand, then glanced at the pile of chips that seemed so small, compared to Richard's massive stack. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. Richard placed his first bet, a large stack of chips that made a loud clink as they hit the table. The other players folded one by one, unwilling to match his confidence. Emily felt the weight of the moment. She wasn't just playing for the $1 million. She was playing for her dignity, her family, and everything she had ever known. "I call," she said, her voice steady, though her stomach churned with nerves. The room went silent as Richard raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that?" he asked. Emily nodded, her gaze unwavering. The dealer flipped over the next card. A hush fell over the table as the tension built. Emily's hand wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Richard's eyes narrowed as he stared at his own cards. He had a good hand, but something about this game was starting to feel off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was a quiet intensity in Emily's eyes that he hadn't expected. As the betting continued, Richard's cocky demeanor began to crack. He had underestimated her from the start. Now he was second-guessing every decision. Emily, on the other hand, was calm. Her focus never wavered. She had studied poker from the shadows, watching the players at the casino, picking up small details here and there. She might not have known the rules like the pros, but she understood people. She understood Richard. The final card was dealt. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was it. Richard smirked and pushed all of his chips to the center. All in, he declared, his voice full of arrogance. Emily took a deep breath. She had one shot at this. I call, she said, her voice firm. Richard laughed, clearly confident he would win. But as the cards were revealed, the entire room gasped. Emily's hand was better. She had won the game. Richard's face drained of color as he stared at the cards in disbelief. His arrogance had been his downfall. He had underestimated the quiet maid's daughter, and now he was the one left speechless. The room erupted in silence, everyone staring at Emily in shock. Richard stood up slowly, his knees weak beneath him. He had lost, and he couldn't understand how. The young woman he had mocked had just taken everything from him. As the dealer pushed the pile of chips toward Emily, she felt a surge of relief. She had done it, not just for the money, but for the respect she had earned. Richard stood there, his jaw slack, as Emily stood up and walked away. She hadn't come here to prove anything to anyone. She had come here to show that even the smallest person can change the game. As the tension in the room began to fade, Emily stood quietly at the table, the weight of her victory slowly sinking in. Richard, on the other hand, was still standing motionless, his face pale, trying to come to terms with the unexpected turn of events. His confidence, which had once radiated through every word and movement, was now replaced with a stunned silence. He had just lost everything to a young woman he had mocked, a woman who had no place at that table. The other players in the room were still processing what had just happened, some of them exchanging glances, others simply shaking their heads. It was clear that no one had expected Emily to win, not even Richard himself. But there she stood, victorious. The dealer, with a quiet nod, pushed the pile of chips toward her, and Emily felt a surge of pride wash over her. She hadn't come to this casino with any intention of playing poker. She had only come with her mother, working as a maid in the grand hotel above. But fate had led her here, and now, she had just earned more money than she could ever imagine. As she glanced at the chips in front of her, she knew this wasn't just about the money. It was about proving something to herself, to Richard, and to everyone who had ever doubted her. Richard, still frozen in shock, finally took a step back. His pride had taken a hit, and he didn't know how to react. The moment had shattered his image of superiority. In a way, it was almost poetic. He had spent his life making others feel small, only to be humbled by the one person he thought he could easily crush. I guess I underestimated you, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her victory had already spoken for itself. She turned away from the table, the weight of the chips still in her hand, but her heart lighter than it had ever been. As she walked toward the door, she could feel the eyes of the room following her, but she didn't look back. She had made her statement. Outside, the bright lights of the casino blurred into the night, and Emily took a deep breath, feeling the cool air on her skin. It was over. She had won. Not just the money, but the respect she had earned in that room. The next morning, as she walked back to the hotel where her mother worked, she couldn't help but smile. The victory wasn't just about her. It was for her mother, who had worked tirelessly to give her a better life. It was for the people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. Emily had proved that no matter where you come from or what people think of you, you can always change the game. As the days went by, the story of the maid's daughter who beat a poker pro for $1 million became the talk of the casino. Richard, once the king of the poker table, was left to reflect on the lesson he had learned the hard way. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about respect, and Emily had earned it. But for Emily, the true reward was not the $1 million in chips. It was the realization that no matter how small you might seem, you could still stand tall and change the course of your own story. As Emily walked back to the hotel, her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had just won $1 million, but the money was nothing compared to the sense of accomplishment that filled her chest. The respect she had earned, not just from the poker players, but from herself, was worth far more. Her hands, once trembling with nervousness, now felt steady as she thought about the look on Richard's face when she called his bet. The casino lights blinked in the distance, the world outside the game buzzing with life, yet everything felt quiet around her. The victory was still settling in, and she found herself thinking about her mother, the woman who had worked so hard to provide a better life for her. Emily could feel the weight of her mother's sacrifices, and she knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was for her mother, too. When she arrived at the hotel, she didn't go straight to her mother. Instead, she stopped by the small restaurant in the corner of the building, where she knew the staff would be finishing their shifts. Emily took a deep breath and approached the kitchen. The chef, a tall, burly man with a thick mustache, looked up from his station. "What are you doing here?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I came to say thank you," Emily replied, her voice soft but confident. The chef looked at her, confused for a moment, then it clicked. The poker game, the money, the shock. He smiled, a proud, almost fatherly smile. "You've made a lot of people proud today, kid," he said. "Not just with your winnings, but with your courage." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't used to compliments, but somehow, from him, it felt genuine. She nodded before turning and walking toward the back of the hotel, where her mother would be finishing up her cleaning duties. When Emily saw her mother, her heart swelled with emotion. Her mother, exhausted as always from a day of hard work, looked up and smiled at her. "How was your day, sweetheart?" she asked, not yet noticing the change in Emily's demeanor. "It was different," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled out the pile of chips from her pocket and placed them on the counter. "I think we're going to be okay." Her mother's eyes widened as she stared at the chips, her tired face slowly turning to one of disbelief. "Emily, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. $1 million, Emily said, her words sinking in. Her mother shook her head, as if trying to make sense of what she was hearing. "But how? How did you?" Emily smiled. "I won it in a poker game. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true." Her mother stood frozen, staring at the chips, then at her daughter. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached out to pull Emily into a tight embrace. "You did it. You really did it," she whispered. Emily felt her mother's tears fall, but this time, they weren't tears of exhaustion or worry. They were tears of pride. Emily had never felt prouder in her life. In that moment, everything felt right. The sacrifices, the hard work, the struggles, they had all led to this moment. It wasn't just about the money. It was about showing her mother that their lives could be different, that they could break free from the cycle they had always been trapped in. That night, as they sat together in their small apartment, Emily made a promise to herself. This was only the beginning. There was so much more to do, so much more to give. And as for Richard, the poker pro, Emily didn't need to see him again. She had already won, not just the money, but the respect she had earned, and the future she was now shaping for herself and her mother. The following days were a blur for Emily. After the poker game, things at the casino had settled down, but her life had changed forever. She could feel the shift in the air every time she walked into the hotel. People were looking at her differently now, with a mix of awe and curiosity. Even her mother seemed to carry herself with a new sense of pride. Emily had thought that winning $1 million would change everything, but she had no idea just how much it would. People she had once served were now greeting her with respect. She could see the shift in the way they spoke to her, the way they treated her. The casino staff, who had once dismissed her as just another maid's daughter, now treated her as an equal. It was both humbling and empowering. Yet, there was one thing that still weighed heavily on her heart. Richard Calloway. She couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter wasn't finished. He had lost everything that day, and Emily couldn't help but wonder how he was dealing with it. She couldn't deny the satisfaction she felt in beating him, but a small part of her wondered if she had truly gotten through to him. It wasn't about the game anymore. It was about the lesson. Did Richard learn anything from that day? Or would he return to his arrogant ways, dismissing her as an anomaly? One afternoon, as Emily was walking through the lobby, she saw him. Richard Calloway, standing by the entrance with a look of deep contemplation on his face. His usual smug expression was gone, replaced by something she hadn't expected, regret. She wasn't sure if he had seen her, but she couldn't help but stop in her tracks. He was pacing slowly, his eyes fixed on the ground, clearly lost in thought. For a moment, Emily wondered if she should just keep walking, but something told her that this wasn't over. She had won, yes, but the story wasn't complete yet. She took a deep breath and walked up to him. "Richard," she said softly. He looked up, surprised, but then his gaze softened. "Emily," he replied quietly, as if he had been expecting her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their last encounter hung in the air, both of them knowing that something had changed, but unsure of what it meant. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about that game," he said, his voice low. "You know, I've played poker for so long, I thought I had seen everything. But you taught me something I didn't expect." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined that Richard would actually acknowledge what had happened. "What's that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "That sometimes it's not about the game," he said, looking her in the eye. "It's about the people. You taught me to never underestimate anyone, no matter their background." Emily stood there, not knowing how to respond. It wasn't the apology she had expected, but it was something. Richard was, in his own way, admitting that he had been wrong. "I don't think I could have won if it wasn't for you," he added, his voice tinged with sincerity. Emily smiled, a quiet satisfaction washing over her. It wasn't just about the game anymore. It was about the respect they had both earned. "I guess we both learned something," she said, before turning to walk away. As she walked out of the casino and into the evening air, Emily felt something shift inside of her. The world had changed, but so had she. She had proven that no matter who you were, no matter where you came from, you had the power to change the game. And with that, she knew that nothing could stop her from going after whatever came next. Emily's life began to feel like a dream. The days that followed her victory at the poker table were filled with new opportunities, but also new challenges. The money was more than she could have imagined, but what struck her the most was the respect she was starting to receive. As time passed, she realized how much had truly changed, not just for her, but for her mother as well. The weight of their financial struggles seemed to lift, and although it was still early days, Emily was determined to make sure they stayed on this path. Her mother, once worried and exhausted from working endless shifts, now smiled a little brighter each day. Emily had promised herself that the $1 million wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. She wanted to do more, to build something that would change the course of their lives forever. She started thinking about her future with a new sense of clarity. The idea of opening her own business, one where she could help others who had been overlooked, crossed her mind. She had seen how people could underestimate someone simply because of their background, and she wanted to be part of a world where that didn't happen. One afternoon, as Emily sat in her small room, she made a decision. It wasn't enough to just sit back and enjoy the money. She had to do something more with it. She had to give back. She remembered the people who had helped her along the way, the chef who had congratulated her, the dealer who had smiled at her as she walked out of the poker room. Those small moments of kindness meant more to her than she could express. She decided that she would use some of the money to start a scholarship fund for young people who came from difficult backgrounds. She knew how much an opportunity could change someone's life. The next few months were a whirlwind. Emily spoke to financial advisors, met with mentors, and put her plan into motion. It wasn't easy, starting something from scratch never was, but she felt a fire inside her that had never been there before. As she watched the scholarship fund grow, she felt a sense of pride that went beyond her own success. The fund began to receive attention, and soon, people were reaching out to her, offering support and advice. Emily's name was starting to make its way into the community, and with it came an invitation to speak at a local charity event. Emily was nervous. Public speaking had never been her strength, but she knew this was another moment for her to step up and show the world that she was more than just the maid's daughter who had won a poker game. The night of the event arrived, and Emily stood in front of the crowd. As she looked out over the sea of faces, she remembered the day she sat at that poker table, feeling out of place, uncertain, and small. But tonight, she wasn't small. She had grown. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for everyone who had been told they couldn't succeed, for everyone who had been dismissed or ignored. "I used to think that the only way to succeed was by following the rules everyone else had set for me," Emily began, her voice steady but strong. But I learned that success isn't about following someone else's path. It's about creating your own. The crowd fell silent, hanging on to every word. Emily could feel the weight of her journey in that room, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged. As she finished her speech, the applause that followed was louder than she could have imagined. She had done it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She had changed the game, and now she was helping others do the same. As Emily's scholarship fund grew, so did her sense of purpose. The support from the community, from those who believed in her vision, was overwhelming. She received messages from young people all over the city, some even from across the country, thanking her for giving them a chance they never thought possible. The feeling of making a real impact, of changing lives, was something Emily had never imagined when she first walked into the casino. She had gone there to prove herself, to show that even a girl from humble beginnings could achieve something great. Now, she was doing so much more. But with success came new challenges. Emily found herself pulled in different directions, juggling the demands of running the scholarship fund while also managing her growing business ideas. There were meetings with potential investors, networking events, and the ongoing work to build something that would last. It was exciting, but it was also exhausting. One evening, after a long day of meetings and paperwork, Emily sat alone in her apartment, staring at the stack of papers on her desk. She had come so far, but the pressure was starting to wear on her. She had always been determined, but now, she was wondering if she could keep up the pace. That night, she received a message that changed everything. It was from Richard Calloway, the poker pro she had beaten all those months ago. At first, she hesitated. After their encounter, she hadn't expected to hear from him again. But curiosity got the best of her, and she opened the message. It was short, to the point. "I want to help." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined Richard, of all people, offering to help her. She had thought he would forget about her, chalk up their encounter to another loss. But here he was, reaching out with an offer of support. The message went on to explain that Richard had turned a corner in his life. After his loss to Emily, he had taken some time away from poker to reevaluate what mattered to him. He had invested in several philanthropic ventures, and now, he wanted to support her scholarship fund. Emily wasn't sure how to respond. She had never seen Richard as anything more than a competitor, someone who saw her as beneath him. But now, his message felt genuine. After a few moments of thought, she replied, "I appreciate your offer. Let's meet." The following week, they sat down at a small cafe. Richard seemed different. Gone was the cocky, arrogant man who had belittled her months ago. In his place was someone who seemed humbled, someone who had learned a valuable lesson. "I've learned that success isn't just about winning," he said, his voice sincere. "It's about making a difference. And you've made a difference, Emily. I want to be part of that." Emily listened, surprised by the change in him. She had never expected this. As they talked, Richard outlined a plan to help fund scholarships for underprivileged students, offering both financial support and mentorship. It was an opportunity that could take her fund to new heights. But Emily didn't make a decision right away. She needed to think it through. As the conversation ended, Richard stood up and shook her hand. "Think about it," he said. "I'm here when you're ready." Emily left the cafe that day feeling a sense of resolve. The decision she faced wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. Could she trust Richard? Could she allow him to be part of her journey? It wasn't an easy choice, but as she thought about it, she realized that maybe, just maybe, people could change. And with the right people, she could do more than she ever imagined. As the days passed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that lingered after her meeting with Richard. The offer he had made was generous, and the potential for what they could achieve together was undeniable. But trusting Richard, a man who had once mocked her, was not an easy decision. She had learned the hard way not to trust people who underestimated her, and yet here she was, being asked to trust someone who had once been her adversary. But as she thought about it, she realized that trust wasn't about the past. It was about the present and the future. People could change. Richard had already proven that. He had stepped up in a way she never expected, and the sincerity in his voice was something she couldn't ignore. It took Emily a few more days to fully come to terms with the decision. She spoke to her mother about it, who, as always, offered her quiet wisdom. "Sometimes, you have to let people show you who they really are," her mother had said. "You can't hold on to the past forever. If he's offering to help, Maybe it's time to take a chance. Emily thought about those words as she sat down in her office, staring at the proposal Richard had sent over. It was a clear plan, financial support for her scholarship fund, along with mentorship for the students she aimed to help. Richard wasn't asking for anything in return other than to be part of something meaningful, something bigger than poker or business. He wanted to make a difference, and Emily could see that. After much deliberation, Emily decided to take the leap. She called Richard and agreed to move forward with the partnership. It wasn't about the money, she had enough of that for now. It was about what they could build together, what they could create for others who, like her, had been overlooked. Richard's response was immediate, filled with gratitude and excitement. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "I won't let you down." The next few months were a whirlwind of progress. With Richard's support, the scholarship fund expanded faster than Emily had ever imagined. More students were able to attend school, more opportunities were created, and Emily found herself at the helm of something much larger than she had initially envisioned. She had gone from being the maid's daughter who had won a poker game to a leader who was changing lives. The community she had once felt disconnected from now looked to her for inspiration. People saw her not as the girl who had beaten the poker pro, but as someone who had turned a win into something far more meaningful. Emily's bond with Richard deepened over time. He proved to be a true ally, offering not just financial support, but guidance and encouragement. Together, they made an unstoppable team. Richard, once known for his arrogance, had become a key player in something that would outlast the poker tables and the casino floors. And Emily, the girl who had started with nothing but a quiet determination, had become a beacon of hope for others. As she sat in her office one evening, reflecting on the incredible journey she had been on, Emily knew that this was only the beginning. They had achieved so much, but there was still so much more to do. The future was full of possibilities, and Emily was ready to face it head-on. She had learned that no matter where you came from or what people thought of you, with the right people by your side, anything was possible. As the years passed, Emily's life continued to transform in ways she had never imagined. The scholarship fund had become a cornerstone of her work, expanding across multiple states, offering opportunities to countless young people who, like her, had been overlooked and underestimated. She had grown not only as a person, but as a leader. The partnership with Richard had evolved into something that neither of them could have predicted. What started as a business venture had become a genuine friendship built on mutual respect. Richard, the poker pro who had once mocked her, had become one of her closest allies. He was no longer just the arrogant player, but a philanthropist who believed in the power of second chances, both for himself and for others. Together, they created a legacy that would outlive them both, a legacy rooted in the idea that no one's background should determine their future. Emily's mother, once a woman who struggled with the weight of the world on her shoulders, was now living a life of peace. She no longer had to work endless hours cleaning hotel rooms. Instead, she spent her time helping Emily with the scholarship fund, using her experience to guide the young people who had come through their program. The two women had built something together that was bigger than either of them, something that had touched the lives of so many. One evening, as Emily sat in her office, reviewing the success of the latest class of scholarship recipients, she received a call from Richard. "Emily, we did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We changed the game." Emily smiled as she looked out the window, watching the sun set over the city. It had been a long journey, but they had done more than just build a successful program. They had created a movement. "Yes, Richard, we did," she replied softly. "And we're just getting started." Emily hung up the phone and took a deep breath. She thought back to the day she had walked into that casino, nervous and uncertain, not knowing what her future would hold. She had faced down one of the best poker players in the world, and she had won. But the true victory had never been about the money. It had been about proving to herself, and to the world, that no matter where you come from, no matter how many people tell you that you can't, you have the power to change your own story. And now, as she looked at the success of the scholarship fund, the community they had built, and the lives they had changed, Emily knew that the best was yet to come. She had taken a chance when no one else believed in her, and now she was making sure that other young people would have the same opportunity to succeed. Emily's journey had started with a poker game, but it had turned into so much more. It had become a story of perseverance, of using what you have to make a difference, of turning a single moment of doubt into a lifetime of impact. As she stood up from her desk and walked out into the world, Emily knew that she had done what she set out to do. She had changed the game, and she would continue to change lives for years to come.